WESN.
It's always a question on perception, interpretation, comprehension. When you speak about communication, when you speak about the conveying of information through the written or spoken word, how will it be perceived? Or how will someone analyze a situation differently to you? Not everything is 100% objective because we ourselves do not perfectly understand everything, so we ourselves cannot perfectly judge things based on 100% objectivity. There's going to be some amount of bias with regards to how we interpret the facts, etc., etc. Recently, Moody's has maintained a stable outlook for our economy with a, let me get the correct rating here, a Ba2 rating. Now, such a rating, when looked at in comparison with our peers, by comparison, Barbados is a B3, which is several steps below. St. Vincent and Grenadines is a B3, but then Cayman Islands is an AA3. That's several steps above. Quite a few steps above, actually. Bermuda is an A2, not quite as good, but better than us. They go AAA, well, the top rating is AAA, then AA 1, 2, 3, then A 1, 2, 3, then BA or BAA 1, 2, 3, and then BA, where we are at the B2. BA2 is judged to have speculative elements and significant credit risk. Now, the Minister of Finance, he's trying to say, well, look, we've maintained our stable outlook. As usual, every time a credit rating agency kind of comes out with something, the minister or the ministry finds the positive silver lining in the situation. And again, we are technically rated better than Barbados and St. Vincent and Grenadines. They are judged as being speculative and a high credit risk. We have speculative elements and we have significant credit risk. So the question is, to what extent should we have high expectations on our little nation whose energy reserves are depleted, and thus, to some extent, it really would be unrealistic for us to have as high expectations now as we would have at the height of the oil and gas booms in the country? I mean, does anyone think Barbados is in a failing position? I'm not entirely sure. They're doing what they have to do. Tourism islands probably are going to have a tough time with regards to the ability to guarantee repaying debt. We're not necessarily there yet, but then the trick is we have a lot of foreign debts. To what extent are we going to be content with continuing as we are, potentially accumulating said debt to try to, that's the problem. We used it to finance one of our deficits. It did help a bit with the foreign exchange shortfall, but that's not a long-term solution. It's a short-term tactic. You could do it once, you could do it twice. Could you do it 3, 4, 5, 6 times? In the long run, to what extent will the compounding effects, not necessarily the compounding interest, come to play? It's difficult because I don't necessarily want to say that the minister's wrong, because there are other neighbors, or there are our neighbors who are not in as good a position as us, but then there are those who are better off than us. So how do we assess our situation? It's within the current framework of where we are now. Because to some extent, we can't necessarily lament about what could have been. With regards to charting our future, we could look to the past to see where we made mistakes and where we made the correct decisions and learn from both scenarios. But at the end of the day, we still have to operate in the framework that we have found ourselves in. The fact that we're supposedly stable, I guess, is one of the main positives, but for how long will we be stable when, again, this credit rating is highlighting our foreign exchange reserves, which can either be import cover or can be guarantees to pay off our debts, but I don't really see how it could be both at the same time. And at some point, when you have too many liabilities being guaranteed by the same asset, essentially, like at some point that is bad business practice, depending, it's potentially unethical. Now, I don't know how many more things we will try to guarantee with one set of foreign exchange reserves. It's not like we're splitting it in order to meet various needs. But how far could this go? Because the problem is stable just means that we're maintaining our position, but an economy is a tricky thing. If it's not growing, arguably it's bad because you're going to suffer through the effects of inflation and population growth one way or the other. So you should have, at some measure, some amount of growth in GDP just because. But we'll have to wait and see. I'm hesitant to look at the silver linings of it at the end of the day. It still comes back down to what's the cost of living in the country. No Moody's credit rating is going to really change my mind on what's going on with regards to the standard of living. It's about the price of bread, etc., etc. You know the rest. Before we go straight to the review, there's another thing I wanted to mention. This is with regards to the gun amnesty. It was reported that it's in place, and yet it's now been reported that no, it's not in place. This came about because of a pre-action protocol letter from Attorney General Ramdeen challenging Regulation 11, which would have allowed for the gun amnesty. Apparently, it's not in place because the period has not been prescribed, so it's not actually fully implemented. Sounds kind of maybe sort of like property tax not being fully implemented, but whatever. Now, with regards to the gun amnesty, the reason why General Ramdeen is challenging it or threatening a legal challenge is the fact that he's saying that these powers should be with the DPP. And the state doesn't have a right to interfere with the powers of the DPP to basically say, you will not be charged under this gun amnesty. And he said, well, how could you do that? How could you do that in this way? Now, to be fair, the opposition leader is saying, well, no, this has to be done in Parliament with a special majority. And it's true, to some extent. I'm not entirely sure how far. It all depends on the technicalities of the case, if it gets challenged. But I believe the Office of the Attorney General basically had that off saying, well, no, it's not actually in place yet. And again, it makes me wonder, how many times do they say something is up, and then when faced with scrutiny, are they going to say, well, it's not actually up. It's not technically, it's not up. So you can't challenge it. To some extent, I do think the courts will say, well, why can't the government offer something like a gun amnesty? The government is not selectively saying, you know, this person needs to be charged for gun offenses, but that person, no. But I get it. The power for the government to do things like that the foundation would probably be in its ability to change legislation. The DPP can't change the legislation. Now, to what extent now is an amnesty a change in legislation, or would an amnesty allow for, would a legislation allow for an amnesty? right? All of those details probably needs to be sorted out by somebody better than I. Meanwhile, the government is again asking for time so that senior counsel could consult, and I just need to understand exactly why is it that, and I never paid close enough attention to politics to know if this happened before in previous administrations, but it seems as though the government makes a major step, right? This is not a small thing. This is not like, oh, we're gonna do some minor change in a legal document somewhere, whatever, right? Something obscure that no one really might be up to date with what's going on, right? This is a major thing. It's an SOE. Let us not forget that it has made international headlines, that it has potentially damaged to some extent our reputation as a tourism destination, or it might have made it more exciting, depending on the free publicity YouTube has given us. And it has also potentially put a damper on foreign direct investment, especially when you get into the threats being circulated by certain important arms of the state, more on that in a bit. So you don't just do this willy-nilly. You don't just gather around the table, all of cabinet, and say, let's have a state of emergency, bust out the Bud Light and say, dilly-dilly. So one would think all of the T's would be crossed, all the I's would be dotted, there would be checks, the consultations would happen before. Why is it that, and this seems to be something that is at least rooted in or potentially caused to some extent by our societal culture. Again, I'm not entirely sure. There have been some controversies with the UNC, but it's never quite looked in this way, that this government is going to implement something or try to implement something and it's going to be somewhat incomplete. It's going to not always be well thought out. It's going to have teething issues. But to some extent, I don't know if they rushed the state of emergency that fast, did it? But you couldn't have taken a couple days. Now, maybe the intelligence, again, was that important for them to rush that fast. But the amnesty was not necessarily in place immediately. So where's the consultation before to ensure that you don't have to go backwards? To be fair, the last state of emergency in 2011, one could argue maybe they didn't cross all their T's and dot all their I's, and that's why they had so many lawsuits coming down the pipe. So again, I'm not saying it's a PNM thing. It could be a political thing. It could be a Trinbagonian thing. It could be a Caribbean thing. It could be a human thing. But I'll say this kind of performance, it's not because of one party or the other. It's not because, I would argue, our society is just completely worthless. I would argue that I think far too often this is what happens when potentially you elevate normal people in extraordinary positions, as opposed to demanding for extraordinary people and attracting extraordinary people. Two of our collaborators have said in different occasions from different perspectives, and I've seen this myself, and some of our callers have called in to say this as well, our best and brightest from our younger generations don't want to be involved in this. What is the implication? With some exceptions then, it's not our best and brightest that are potentially in Parliament and going up in the future for Parliament. It is the best of what's left. And it's not about being intelligent and having academic qualifications. There are many different talents that will contribute to leadership, judgment, critical thinking, thoroughness, attention to detail. Those two words seems to be often forgotten by our political class. And maybe we could point to other politicians around the world, including the big countries, and say they do it too. But to some extent, sometimes you grade on a curve to be fair, but sometimes the stakes are too high, and it's not about being fair, it's about the results. don't necessarily like to do it that way, but when people are suffering in various ways, I think that may trump your personal sensitivities. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll kick off the daily review, get through some topics to close out the week, and then we'll have a special guest for the first time since we've seen him last. You'll understand what I mean. Stay tuned to Talking About WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain. SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution. Check out more on our products and services at www.smgrouptt.com. Contact us at 221-7445 or email at info@smgrouptt.com. We are SM Group International, your solutions partner.
The best for your baby is at thebesttoys.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in-store at Forces Flagship McLean. Shop online now at thebesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
All right, with all that out of the way, of course, let's close out the week with today's daily review. And the saga continues. And a new consideration has been brought up with regards to what happened with the PNM Legislative Caucus that saw Stuart Young edge out Penelope Beckles 11-9, but then in a subsequent follow-up exercise, Camille Robertson-Regis was not able to get the signatures of all the MPs to state, hey, we support Stuart Young to be Prime Minister if and when Dr. Keith Rowley, I have to say if now, because this whole thing is fluid, right? If and when Dr. Keith Rowley resigns from being the Prime Minister. Now, one former mayor of Arima and I believe government or PNM MP Ashton Ford, he has pointed out something very interesting with regards to some of the MPs, and I assume he's referring to those who have not necessarily signed the letter or the document. He said, now with the intervention of all these commentators, they want a general council meeting. Basically saying he found it quite strange that some of the MPs were singing a different tune. They changed their position. Now, yesterday I went with the assumption that it seemed as though, based on the reports, the MPs did not know exactly what they were voting for. One of the reports basically said the MPs thought they were just deciding who will be prime minister to close out the term in the interim, who will essentially be the interim prime minister, but that the party would have to go through the motions of selecting a new political leader who will then lead the party in the re-election campaign or the next election campaign. It'll technically be a different administration, I guess you could say. And I couldn't fathom the fact of, hold on, wait a minute, y'all didn't ask this question? Like, this is an obvious question. This is not a long question to ask, to bring up what's happening to the position of political leader. Now, maybe because of the internal workings of the internal politics, no one felt they had the capacity to ask that question. They didn't necessarily want to stick their neck out too far, but then again, it seems like they're sticking their neck out far at this point, right? So I'm not entirely sure if Mr. Ford is correct, because he's stating, based on the things that have been put out there into the public, why is it that they pledged to do something and now they don't want to do it, right? And maybe he hasn't read the reports, maybe he isn't fully aware, or maybe he has some amount of inside information, whether historical, he knows the people, or he heard a thing or two. It could be a rumor, maybe not, I don't know. Now, he has pointed out to the fact that, look, at the end of the day, the whole situation about the precedent to become prime minister or opposition leader with the support of the MPs, they have been there. He's put out several examples, including, first of all, when Dr. Eric Williams died, the announcement of George Chambers as the new prime minister after consulting party chairman. Then when the PNM was defeated, he said the 3 surviving MPs chose Mr. Manning as opposition leader. And then Dr. Rowley was appointed as opposition leader after the 2010 defeat, only after which the party held a convention. So, based on Mr. Ford, some of the, I guess you could say, hardliners, or no, we have to stick to the rules. Well, the precedent has been there that, at least with regards to the offices within parliaments, aren't necessarily, they're not necessarily covered by the convention. It's more of a courtesy, it's more of a respect. It's an informal requirement because, of course, it'll make things easier if you go through the party first, because then you won't run the risk of losing support within the party. But again, I think it reiterates the point, especially when it comes to look at Mr. Manning, how he became opposition leader after the NAR won. The 3 surviving MPs, they just talked amongst themselves and figured it out, right? Because at the end of the day, the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, as Keaton mentioned, it speaks to the people in Parliament, not party executives. Now, the political leader will be the Prime Minister, and if he is unwilling, then it will be he who controls the majority support in Parliament. What is interesting is that they had a meeting last night. They refrained from speaking to media. This is members of the PNM's legislative body. But it seems as though that those who do not want to sign are still waiting for the General Council meeting. I believe the meeting that they did have with Jennifer Bettis Primus and certain, I think it's the party executive, they decided to wait for the General Council. They decided to wait for the upcoming General Council meeting, I believe it is. Because the Central Executive because the Legislative Caucus was still discussing it, the Central Executive apparently decided to not discuss it at their meeting, right? So Jennifer Bettis Primus said she's still hopeful because as long as there's discussions, there is then ongoing negotiations and room to maneuver. We have to wait and see what happens with the General Council. It seems as though the PNM were willing to put up a brave front to the public, or a united front, where they didn't have any public displays of animosity. And for the most part, it goes back to what Keaton and others have been saying with regards to the PNM understanding. Let's limit our dirty laundry being exposed to the public. What's happened has happened, but Maybe it's a mature way to move forward, depending, I mean, it all depends on how this unfurls, right? Meanwhile, just wanted to mention Mr. Philip Edward Alexander. Now, based on the report, you can't take away from the article, the news article, the impression that he's kind of pushing to some extent, maybe too much that is more than appropriate, that somehow the government is in disarray and it needs to be dissolved because Kamala Persad has the majority in Parliament, right? The headline points you in that direction. The article then kind of walks back from that absolute position, right? At the end of the day, the opposition leader and her 19 opposition-held seats don't come into play until Dr. Keith Rowley resigns or until someone issues a vote of no confidence, that's a motion that successfully passes in the House, I would imagine. And we're nowhere near that yet, right? So I'm not entirely sure. The quote is the outgoing Prime Minister has, I believe, 7 days in which to accept that reality or to dissolve the Parliament if he resigns, I guess. So I don't know why he's jumping the gun. I don't know why he is just, you know, it's almost like if he's encouraging Dr. Keith Rowley, hey, just stop what you're doing and fix it. I'm not entirely sure what was the point of the claims that he was making. Why bring that up now from his perspective? I brought it up yesterday as a possibility, and maybe I wasn't clear. It's not like I think it's likely to happen, because again, the PNM would have to fracture. Not just fracture within, have differences of opinion, but essentially split almost in half and do so in a very public manner, which I don't think is likely to happen, because that will not meet the needs of the various agendas of the individuals involved, whether the agendas are good for us, bad for us, selfish or benevolent. Regardless, it won't be in line with any of those potential motivations, so I doubt it would happen. So we'll have to wait and see on this story, more on it later. Just want to move on, a quick mention with regards to the fact that, look, we have a state of emergency, and in the middle of a state of emergency, death threats were made on social media to members of the judiciary. I mean, it was quite blatant, basically encouraging people to harm members of the judiciary, which I understand people who are frustrated. Think about it. How many times have you heard, seen, saw in a movie, seen someone do it in real life? You're on the street, you're vexed, and you say, I will kill you, so and so, whatever, whatever, right? Doesn't actually mean that you mean it in the moment. Now, in this case, it was a little bit worse than that with regards to the context, I would say, right? I don't think he meant it in a rhetorical way. The poster on social media, who from what I understand has subsequently been arrested. Of course, one prosecutor who also is linked to the SSA. So I don't know if we've had enough evidence to necessarily squash that as a potential motivation for the killing. But let's just stick with the fact that he was a prosecutor. He was killed more or less on the last day of the year, but the day after the proclamation of the SOE. Now, apparently, prosecutors are basically, they're being, let me get they're getting security risk training. And the police are looking to try to put more security in place for some of these people, although it's not in place yet. And now we have to question once again with regards to resources, because every man needs to be on deck with regards to the state of emergency. It's just, how is it that we have a state of emergency to clamp down on violence, and yet we have threats targeted at the criminal justice system, and now the suppression of the state of emergency is not sufficient, and we potentially have to find more resources for targeted protection of these individuals. And it just goes to show that the fact that the problem has grown so large that it has become increasingly difficult to manage, and I think it makes a great case, or continues the argument for, we need more innovative, dare I say, extreme measures, but I say that with quotation marks, right? Because I'm not saying we should have like a hit squad going out there just killing gangsters, but extreme in the sense of not necessarily within the legal framework and maintaining human rights, but maybe strategies that are not necessarily commonplace. They might be considered a little bit, I don't know, odd or crazy or off the wall or well outside of the box. But once it's within the law, once we're not violating anyone's human rights, then we need to do something different. We can't keep doing the same thing, or we have an SOE. So we will, to some extent, do what we were doing before the SOE, just more of it. And I understand why the SOE could make that more effective, but still, the growth of our crime problem, I think we need to, I mean, if it's a public health risk, I have yet to see public health measures to deal with crime as a public health situation. So I don't understand. What's the point at this stage of the government continuing that narrative if they're actually not addressing it or adding extra measures that will address it from that angle? I don't understand. Of course, because of all of this, the opposition leader has reiterated a call for stand your ground. Moving on to the next story, quickly. Stand your ground laws, I understand that to some extent we have a right to defend ourselves already. So I'm not entirely sure what extra legislation she's looking to have, except for the potential change in the accessibility of FULs. Now, how it would be changed to make it more accessible, I don't think the opposition leader has given us any details. Here, ultimately, is the problem. It's literally, let's just say we all want this. To arm the population on a practical level will be difficult. Just physically to get the FULs done, even if you digitize your system, right? Everybody still needs to be checked out. You can't check out batches at a time. You have to check out each individual. You have to get the guns for each individual. They have to buy the guns, etc., etc. What about the people who can't afford guns? Are we going to turn a blind eye to illegal guns if someone says it's for self-defense, like how we turn a blind eye to PH taxis? And then what happens when a lot of common people now have firearms and potentially crimes of passion happen? Murder, suicides, domestic violence, etc., etc. Which is why all of these background checks that the police have to do, they need to be extensive. It's not like it could be done in 50 minutes. So I don't really see this as a solution. Because to some extent, this is the main thing that the opposition leader is touting. And while I wouldn't necessarily disagree with ensuring citizens in good standing having access to tools to defend themselves moving forward, I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. I'll agree with that. But why is it that that's central to your campaign? I don't understand that. At the end of the day, we still need to deal with crime from the level of crime fighting, prosecution, conviction, evidence gathering, etc., etc. Crime prevention, not on the level of arm the population and hope that a widespread gun battle does not break out. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, hopefully we will have our new old friend. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WESN. We'll be right back after this.
Simons Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simons, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain. SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution. Check out more on our products and services at www.smgrouptt.com. Contact us at 221-7445 or email at info@smgrouptt.com. We are SM Group International, your solutions partner.
The best for your baby is at wesn.com. From the best strollers, car seats, baby carriers, high chairs, booster seats, rockers, jumpers and bouncers, walkers, baby blankets, feeding accessories, bathtubs. Visit us in store at Forces Flagship McLean. Shop online now at dbesttoys.com. Order via call or WhatsApp at 332-BABY. And remember, we have the best toys at the best prices.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide: Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience.
Give us a call at 235-5479
for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
Welcome back to Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen. And I know that a lot of people, usually when I say new old friend, they might be thinking, oh, it's Keaton. Or then they might think, oh, it's a Friday, so it might be Janelle John Bates, or it could be Mark Anthony Peter. But no, I have a surprise for you. Bet you didn't see this coming, or maybe you did. Because we have with us disaster management subject matter expert, our disaster management contributor, dare I say, Mr. Ashraf Ali. Welcome back, I guess, in some ways, to Talking Points, in this new version of Mr. Ali.
Thank you very much, Sean, and Happy New Year to you and all your listeners.
Yes, Happy New Year. You know, funny enough, I still have Christmas presents that I haven't opened, so I keep forgetting with regards to the holiday greetings, right? And there are a lot of people who I haven't seen yet for the year, and I'm probably gonna forget to wish them Happy New Year. I feel so bad.
I'm still trying to try to make sure that I write 2025 because I keep writing 2024.
Ironically, I haven't made that mistake yet, and I know last year around this time I was making that mistake for about a week, but I haven't made it yet. So, Of course, a lot has happened since the last time you've came.
Yes, yes, yes.
With regards to national security, luckily we have not had any natural disasters or any large-scale disasters or anything like that yet to touch on that part of the expertise. In fact, before we get into the state of emergency and all of the other subjects that we can, just so people can understand, you were a police officer, but your field of study.
Yeah, so I disaster management, critical incident, critical incident, ICS certified instructor, a mass casualty management instructor, training instructor. I have my degrees in security administration at the same time. So when you look at planning and coordinated for major events and major incidents, this is where my field, my experience within the law enforcement agency, where people do believe that police officers also have a wide scope of training in different areas, and you're carrying a lot of different areas. So, so I am no longer a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Per se, I am on pre-retirement leave, so I have given a lot of time, right, and it's time for me to enjoy my pre-retirement. I'm actually retiring just now and exploring my options as to what I could continue to contribute to the Trinidad and Tobago. Unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, for some officers who are on vacation leave, the state of emergency, and this is what a state of emergency is, that the Commissioner of Police and the Office of the Commissioner of Police will call all the available resources up and back to duty because of the situation.
And to be fair, this is the norm.
This is
and it's not like she can plan for this.
No.
To say, why did you approve my leave? It's like, I didn't know the government was going to issue a state of emergency.
So there are circumstances that, as was mentioned by the Deputy Commissioner of Police recently, that there are officers who have not returned as yet. There are many circumstances where officers would have applied for leave for particular reasons. They were determined based on their needs, at what point in time they could come out, right? Because we may have officers out of the jurisdiction, that will take them some time before they can get back into the country and report off leave. Some officers may be on medical leave, right? Considering the circumstances of the leave that they are on, they would not be able to report off or be effective because of the type of leave that they may on. Remember, we have female officers at the same time. They have officers who are on maternity leave, right? So there are a lot of circumstances in terms of that. And so when they made a mention that there are a lot of officers still were waiting to come off leave, it's not that they are being very failing to comply with any instruction or just doing what they want, but there are circumstances.
Right, because the reports, this is one of the things, like I have brought up accountability in national security services, but I didn't want to just say, because to say that it would be so blatant that large numbers of officers are just going to ignore the Commissioner of Police, and when obviously there's a state of emergency, like this is not like she's just arbitrarily saying no leave and there's no good reason and it's left the officers in the lurch. So I didn't, but the implication, I think, of a lot of people might be, oh my gosh, didn't you see all the officers don't want to come out or come back?
So when we talk about state of emergency, a lot of persons reflecting on state of emergency from the coup in 1990. But I was not here in the same day, so I can't speak to that.
Right, okay.
Right.
Okay.
In 1990, I was a young man.
Yeah.
Right, and I experienced the state of emergency from the average citizen, understanding that those curfews was really distressing for some people. Okay. In that when you look at a curfew, it really restricts your movements and everything like that to certain. In 2011, I was on active duty, and I experienced the state of emergency from that context. And when you had curfews, there was a lot of inconvenience and things that the citizenry had to face. I remember a situation when we were on patrols in working for duties at 6 o'clock when the curfew kicking in. There were a number of persons who was stranded in certain areas went to the police station and stayed the night in the police station because they were afraid to really go outside because there was nothing. So that was a curfew of that. A curfew brings that also. You have to manage, right? So we are in this situation now, and we have a state of emergency. And a lot of persons don't understand what a state of emergency means. If I would give you a simple definition, an emergency, basically we call an emergency a serious or unexpected and often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. That is what this is about. It means that based on all the information, a decision was made by the government of the day that they need an immediate action. An immediate action to curb a situation. And what was the situation we were talking about? The rise in the crime situation, potential violence outbreak, right? And so as a result of that, a state of emergency was put in place because the country was in a state of emergency, or we had an emergency situation to address. So in our laws, our SOE regulation gives some powers that persons would have to, that the Commissioner of Police, the Defense Force, additional powers, and what we call extraordinary powers that the average day in this country you don't have. You actually given up some of your rights, right? Now, one thing that we have to understand is that there's a lot of conversation of whether or not the state of emergency is beneficial or not.
Yes.
My personal view at this point in time is this. We cannot really effectively evaluate a state of emergency in 2025 and compare it to 2024 when we were not in a state of emergency.
Okay.
Because what do we have to work with? 2024 was a record year with the number of homicides. I would say since in 2023, we are already in an emergency situation. We were in a state of emergency from the context of where our crime was going.
Because the reason why I would agree with that is, and I kind of mentioned or implied it earlier, it seems like the whole crime situation has gone beyond the ability of the available resources to treat with it effectively. And now the one good thing about the state of emergency, our murder rate has dipped below 1 a day for the first time, and I can't remember how long, right? 4 murders in 8 days, that's half a murder a day. Less than, that's a big deal because we were reaching to 2 a day for the most part for the last couple of years, right? But at the same time, now there was a desecration of a mosque, I believe, and outward religious, well, I don't know if it would be threats on the level of the threats made potentially against the judiciary and the potential risks to state prosecutors. And, you know, one could ask to the public, on one hand, you're seeing, well, the murder rate is down. So the suppression of the violence on a practical day-to-day level is there. But on the other hand, you have someone willing, at a time when the police have more powers to just scoop you up and arrest you if you do anything questionable, like threatening violence, somebody decides to do that to all judges and puts out a call encouraging violence against judges. And you're like, we understand the emergency, and this person thinks this is a bright idea to do this. Like, he has no fear of law enforcement because it's pretty obvious. He puts the post, so he makes the video. It's a threat to the criminal justice system, to people's lives. What does he expect going to happen? And I wonder if some people are kind of taking it for granted. I don't know if the curfew is so ingrained that an SOE needs a curfew. Otherwise, to some people, maybe it's not an SOE. Well, it's like people not really realizing we are under a state of emergency. This is not that different from 2011. We just don't have the curfew.
So that is what I'm saying. When a state of emergency has been implemented or initiated, the expectation is that there are curfews. So the public expectation that there are limitations in the movements of individuals between certain times, right? In 2020, with the COVID pandemics, we had limitations. Any timings that persons would have to move. But we don't have it now. The decision of why not to use it. There's a lot of argument, a lot of consideration, and the persons who decide not to use the curfew Maybe they see it from a different light. But in the regulation gives the Office of the Commissioner the authority to implement a curfew or restriction on movements of individuals. But are we utilizing it?
Well, I mean, as much as there are some people, it's so funny, and this is one of the times when you see the catch-22 of governance. The government doesn't put a curfew in, some people complain, well, what kind of state of emergency is this? But if they did put the curfew in, not just businesses, but there will be private citizens who also will complain, we don't want a curfew, why are you doing this to us?
And within crisis management and disaster management, when you implement measures, it's short-term measures to bring a current situation under control. So if you have to implement the hard measures in the short term, which the state of emergency was saying that we have reached a situation that we have to implement hard measures. If we're saying that and we're not doing it, then we are not really on the same page, right? Because the public doesn't feel that they're in a state of emergency. All they know that they are in we have a state of emergency, but the perception and the feelings, you have to have persons, the criminal elements of in Trinidad and Tobago cannot have business as usual, cannot be allowed to work, cannot be allowed to traverse the areas and the communities that they have on a normal basis.
Well, I have to bring this up, right? Because I guess one of the unfortunate things, depending on your perspective, that happened with regards to how we perceive the state of emergency. A state of emergency is declared, and then one of the worst targeted attacks to a public official happened the very next day, and a state prosecutor has been killed. And the brazenness of it, I guess, because essentially the criminal sent a message, and I don't think there's suspects in custody for that attack, right? The criminal sent a message that said, we don't really care about your state of emergency, you know. And I do wonder if it all comes back down to things like, look, well, since the immediate detection rate is so low, you could have extra powers, but to some extent, it's kind of meaningless if you still can't find the murderers, you know. I mean, even if we improve the immediate detection rate with the increased powers of the state of emergency, you could jump to 40%, and that still might not be enough because of where the violence is at now. And it seems like the criminals element has some sense of immunity almost. You know, odds are they're gonna get away scot-free, essentially.
Yeah, and that is another conversation in which we speak to our the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service detection rate, and that has been a conversation for some time now. But for now, our murder rate is the Trinidad and Tobago murder rate is, I would want to say, considered really, really good in comparison to last year. But could we really compare last year to this year?
I mean, yes. It's because if we compare ourselves to foreign cities that have about a 1.5 million population, 100 murders for them is usually bad.
Yes.
So, and we're still in that range. We lamented when we got there. So this is a tricky situation. The other thing is, to what extent will the murder rate, the suppression hold after the state of emergency?
That is the context in which the state of emergency, you have to look at the state of emergency. When you implement measures in any critical incident event, and this is a critical event when it dealing with it from a disaster management or critical incident management perspective.
Yeah.
Our crime situation is of a critical situation right now. We are in a critical situation as of last year. The state of emergency was a mitigation measure to curb or suppress the situation that we were in. Those measures, and in disaster management, and it cannot be long-term. Those are short-term measures. And we know that the state of, as of Monday, they have to go back before Parliament and discuss the extension.
In fact, there's a lot of expectation it's not going to go past 3 months because the opposition probably won't support.
Right. So based on our legislative framework, 3 months is the maximum. After that, you have need more support.
Could it be that they kind of, one of the benefits, I don't know, this is just speculation, they kind of did this in part to cover Carnival?
Well, if you check the time frame, state of emergency may the 3 months might be just prior to Carnival, right? I don't think it's the cover Carnival. I think the state of emergency was because of the unexpected situation that was presented to the National Security Council, right? And the potential fallouts of what is going to take place.
So based on what you just said, and I do want to take a break soon, but based on what you just said, some of what the government has said, it kind of points to the fact that, oh, well, there's a high level of violence and assault rifles. And some of the criticisms against the stated motivations for the state of emergency, not all, but some, because they also said there were specific things, but they haven't gone into that. A lot of people are saying, well, there have been high-powered rifles and mass shootings and multiple casualties. Because when the Prime Minister says, well, we were afraid of an incident where there will be a reprisal killing. That was one of the main examples, right? Where, in a sense, people will be caught in the crossfire. Something to that effect. But it's like, well, we had those already for the year. We had 2 in the span of, I think, a couple of months.
Yes, we
Park Place, and I can't remember the location of the other one.
Right,
and Cocoreach, right. And that was what, within a month or 2 of each other? So, you know, like, I guess, would you agree that there's something more and specific to the threat, potentially an escalation, and the government, maybe they just don't want to tell us?
From a national security perspective, information like that should never be should not be put in the public domain.
Right.
There are certain things of national security interest, and I think that information would have caused a decision of the state of emergency to be made.
So it's something more extreme potentially on what we've seen.
Well, when you look at the leading up to it, and the type of activities that was taking place and the information on the ground. Now, yes, they have intelligence of gang violence and all of that, but when you look at what may have been the fallout of that situation in Besson Street and then the retaliation in
Cocoreach?
No, in Lavantil.
Yeah.
Right. That was that could have been the tipping point for more shootings that could have caused a number of more lives before the year done. The issue was not the year ending and where we'd have finished, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think Trinidad and Tobago was concerned about where we would have finished. We have already crossed the 600. The issue is what would have been our situation going forward. It would have spilled over into this year, and we'd have continued the same trend because a number of lives would have been lost.
Because, and we didn't bring it up before, so maybe after I make this point, we could bring it up and then take the break, come back, because you brought up something that I want to touch on before we finish the show. But there's certain things you don't want to put out in the public sphere with regards to human behavior, because it will encourage more behavior. One of those things potentially is suicides, right? One of the other things is crimes. You know, when we had the kidnapping wave, of course, there were some kidnappings that were done because whatever the reasons by the major drug lords to have whoever kidnapped for whatever thing. And then there were the fly-by-nights who kind of followed fashion, followed the trend, and that's where you had some of the jokey situations where the victim might have just walked out of their captivity and be recovered, and you're kind of wondering what kind of amateur hour is this? But you're glad for it because the person is safe, you know, and then end up harmed because they didn't know what they were doing. Could it be that to some extent one of the reasons why you want to try to suppress the violence is because I do say before that Pennywise money truck robbery where they basically ambushed military style, they shot first and then worried about other considerations later. That was a level of violence that I to some extent still shocks me to this day that it happened, right? That you committed a robbery by just doing a triple homicide off the bat. That was the first instance I can remember automatic weapons being used, and it's almost like once that happened, because the police were confiscating large caches of automatic rifles before that. much more frequently than now, relatively
Yes.
speaking, right? And we didn't have examples of criminals using automatic rifles to spray down groups of people. Then that happened, and then all of a sudden now it's like, yeah, you could do this. I didn't know we could do this. Let's keep doing this. And, you know, is it that you want to kind of keep things from going too far because it will just, the escalation is not just that one group is willing to escalate, but it will encourage everybody, even if it's not reprisals against each other, to now up their level of game, up their level of violence, because they want to be feared. So you can't just be the jokey man with the homemade shotgun now. You have to have the full auto, you know, to mow down.
Well, let me bring an analogy to you. In mass casualty management, we teach this. The longer you take to address an emergency situation by implementing the amount of measures that you need to, you end up with a disaster. And once it reaches a disastrous situation, your resources become outstripped. Right? So if it is that this is a critical situation, we are in an emergency situation, you have to use your available resources, all the strategies that you need to mitigate and control this situation and bring it under control. If you do not do that and you allow it to continue and escalate, we would end up in we would not be in an emergency situation. We might end up in a disastrous situation similar to some of our Caribbean counterparts. I don't even want to call that onto us.
We've already technically called it already as a warning because it might seem so far away, and it is far away. We're not close to where one of our neighbors are, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible for us to get there, basically, right?
It is not.
Now, we just want to acknowledge the passing one retired police officer. I won't say his name. It has been discovered, and I believe right now there's strong reasons to believe that he committed suicide, and just want to offer the condolences to his family and friends. And just want to point out, I guess we kind of take it for granted. I believe that some police officers, they are police officers just for a job. But regardless of the motivations, good or bad, and there are police officers who keep the ship running and do the work. And it's not the kind of stress that you're going to get as a police officer. It's not the kind of stress you're going to get in an office doing a 9 to 5, just making copies and writing emails.
It's so true, and I have said this on several occasions, and when I had on the other hat in any capacity, that we as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, so if even from the foundation of being a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, having all these stresses of society, stresses of living and everything else, and coupled with being a police officer, going through all of that, then the officer would have retired. And so you came from civilian life into paramilitary life, being a law enforcement officer, and then going back into a civilian life. Sometimes it's not easy for persons to transition. There's a lot of things that may be going on in the officer's life that we take for granted. And in all our lives, we don't really see mental issues as prominent enough to treat with it, right? Unfortunately, I don't know the circumstances in which the officer took his life or why the officer took his life, but at the end of the day, a life was lost, and a lot of persons would have been affected, right? Both his colleagues as well as families and friends. And these are some of the things that we had to look at. Now, when you're in a state of emergency and we have curfews, you are under some pressure.
Yeah.
You are under extreme pressure because you're limited in the amount of movement that you can do. Sometimes when you hear, let's say if a curfew was at 6 o'clock, 5 to 6, you're hustling to reach home because you don't want to make it, because you always want to be in time because you don't know what can happen after that. We saw that in 2020 when we had the curfew for the COVID. Right? A lot of persons were caught outside or within the curfew period, and they were worried as to what could happen to them if the police will treat them, how the police would treat them if they would get arrested and charged for breach of the curfew, because there are circumstances that put them in that area, because you have to offset your entire structure, right? Adjust for that period. So it's not only the criminal elements would have to adjust, it's the average citizen also have to adjust because your movement and restriction was there. So I guess because of that, no curfew was instituted for this one. But I'm still saying, if the criminal elements have freedom of movement, the average citizen does not have freedom of movement. Before the state of emergency, did the average law-abiding citizen have freedom of movement? They were restricted in their own space. So we are already in a curfew for ourselves.
I'll support that point by saying I have gone to places where one would not expect someone like me to go, right? And I used to have the attitude of, well, what's the worst that could happen? Why will anyone do anything to me?
Yeah.
When you're a young man and you don't really have much to your name and you're not walking with any jewelry or anything like that, I move simply, right? It's fine. But now, I don't think like that anymore.
No,
Like for the last year and a half, 2 years, for the first time in my life, I'm not just talking about hotspots and the obvious places where people would not frequent. I'm talking about general places. The KFC on Charlotte Street, I'm wondering, should I even go to that?
No.
Driving down Charlotte Street, like all of a sudden, the parts of East Port of Spain, I know people who have dropped to their apartments in that part of town, not frequently, but it has happened, right? Now I'm like, I don't know, boy. I'll be fearful for anybody living in those areas, Gonzales, Mova. I understand not everybody is bad, but the point is, it is what it is. So even where I live, I don't make assumptions that it's safe.
So technically you implement a personal state of emergency on yourself?
Basically.
So we all have been doing it.
I actually think so.
However, we are in a state of emergency and the criminal elements still have freedom of movement.
Folks, I want to take a break. Now, we can't take phone calls today because we're having audio issues. Our crew has tried to fix it, but it seems as though, it's serious enough that it can't be fixed during the course of the show. But we'll take a break. We still have, stuff that I want to talk with our new contributor, retired Inspector Ashraf Ali. Folks, stay tuned to talk about the WSN, the Content Capital. We'll be right back after this.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore Color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today. Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Our intelligence post.
Right. Sorry, we're back. The conversation's continued off the air, and we might bring it on the air. But there's one thing I wanted to get to, though, and this is something you've spoken about before, and it's come up with regards to, I can't remember the context of why, but some of the callers this week brought up the, in one instance, the commissioners pointed out that, look, we don't have the manpower. I think the head of the Social Welfare Association, he's pointed out that we're short 1,400 of the authorized strength, right? Which I think is one of those key things that people kind of need to understand. The authorized strength is what the police are authorized by whatever regulations. This is how much people you can employ. This is how much people your budget should be able to pay their salaries and equip and so forth and so forth. And in theory, we're supposed to have enough equipment for all these officers. Now, it came up with regards to there's the public perception, and I know that you've spoken against this at some point in time, and you yourself an example that this is not entirely true. Where do we get these officers? How qualified are they? Why is it that, you know, when we have recruitment drives, so many people, they don't seem to be qualified, or they don't seem to be educated, or some of the officers that do go for education, you know, while being officers, and they go to tertiary educations, like we're not seeing. At the end of the day, I don't know what the statistics are to who has degrees in the police service, but the public, I think, at least some people, we're not kind of feeling the benefits of not an educated police force, in part, which makes sense because we don't really see the benefits or feel the benefits of an educated society despite having gates.
Well, I was taken aback also when I read an article in the papers where the commissioner indicated that a number of persons, and when I saw the headline, lying recruits, whoa, that speaks volumes. That
although, could it be that, you know, some of these guys, they had things that may have technically disqualified them, but they didn't have bad intentions.
And that is what I'm saying. The way it was brought across from the article, right? It doesn't give context at all. It just paints a broad brush across all the recruits and saying that the recruits fail the psychometric and they fail the polygraph. And I mean, there are circumstances where so when you do a psychometric test is what? Your psychological stability, right? Or your ability, or certain psychological issues that they may have. When you look at that persons, there are a lot of persons who are walking around here who went through trauma, have not addressed the trauma, right? And those are the individuals who have to come back into an organization to go back to to deal with traumatic situations and persons' trauma. If you have not resolved your trauma, how could you assist somebody who has trauma? And these are some of the things that you look like. So then, based on the assessment of the individual, they may not have reached the benchmark, right? Because there are indicators that so they may not have reached the benchmark. So then those individuals was not successful. It does not mean that all was not successful. It's just that there are certain persons wasn't successful. And being a police officer and being an officer for the last 20-something years, 27 plus years, it takes a toll on you.
Now, but would you appreciate the fact that, and this is going to be a bit of a stretch of what I'm about to say, but the public are going to perceive that certain extreme cases can happen, right? And as we were talking about it, as you started to give your part, I just immediately went to the Scorsese film, The Departed, where the central plot point was Matt Damon's character essentially was a plant by Jack Nicholson's drug lord or crime boss character. Now, again, we know there are bad apples in the police service. I'm sure the public would love to speculate once they kind of see, oh, people fail the psychometric testing, you know, the bad apples are coming in. Now, maybe they might view it as a sign that, hey, they're screening the bad apples out. But, like, do you understand that some people might go with the conspiracy theories of, yeah, boy, they're trying to put plants in the police service?
Well, see, I would say in all sectors of society, right? And there's all sectors of society that you may not have the best fit for the organization in all facets of it. I cannot comment on I cannot comment because
psychometric testing is
a personal
job performance kind
right.
of, yeah.
So I can't comment on it, but you have to be able to treat with your internal issues, your domestic, your financial, your personal issues, and at the same time, when you're on this job, remove yourself from that and address the public's concern that may have been here. So let me give you a prime example. If an officer is going through a domestic situation home, let's say they're going through a divorce, just like everybody else because they're human beings, and they have some conflict, and a female comes or a male comes in and somebody comes and speak about that same domestic situation, that person may not be able to remove themselves to think objectively because at some point in time they may reflect on the empathy of that individual and may not be objective in
project.
Right.
You know, and worse yet, in their mind, they're a victim, they suffered, and it's like, if you're not suffering like how I'm suffering, something's wrong with you. You're making the wrong choices. You need to testify this, or you need to not testify, or you need to do what I want you to do.
Exactly.
Not what you should do.
So there's a lot of facets into it. And even when you go to a business place, let's say you go to the bank, do you know how the banking individual at that point in time is behaving, or what is going through that person's psychological? One little thing you might say to that person might trigger that person and treat you indifferently at that point in time.
Not that I want to brag, but I am constantly, one of the things that I've constantly said over the last couple of months is, why do people treat customer service people or make demands or have unreasonable expectations? I don't understand it, because I've run into a lot of examples recently where it's like, I would never do this. I would never ask for this. I would never get on in this way. And one of those reasons is that, what will it benefit me? Yes, I understand sometimes when you're mistreated, you need to push back and not tolerate it. But we haven't reached that point with every single person we interact with right from the jump, right? It's incredible that it happens, I guess, too often in our society, but sometimes you just get further by being nice. So with regards to the bank, it's a teller. Yes, maybe this teller might have a different policy than that teller. Am I going to make a big fuss about it? Like, to some extent, no, unless we're talking about high stakes. I'm trying to get some, not that I've ever done this, but trying to get some big loan or trying to do some big whatever, right? It's like, if it's just day-to-day things, I need to pay a couple $100 here or there, right? Why am I going to pick a fight now? That's going to be longer than the transaction I'm trying to see about.
Exactly. And we see this, I saw 2 videos recently on social media, and where officer was arresting an individual. I don't know the circumstances in it, because if you didn't give it the full context of it,
right.
Thing.
Always, yeah.
Right, you don't get the full context, but what was important is that the attitude towards the officer by the individual. I mean, why do you, because you believe somebody is video recording the incident, you want to become so outlandish with your statements and make allegations about you. So you just want to make a scene. Technically, you're making a scene because somebody is recording.
Yeah.
And you're so vocal and you're so boisterous that it wasn't making any sense. When you listen to the conversation, you're asking, why are you talking to me? Why you want to arrest me? We're in a state of emergency. People have to understand we're in a state of emergency.
Well, I mean, even if you're not
out of a state of emergency, if a law enforcement officer asks you a question, please answer the question.
At least,
why are you asking him why he doing the work? Because you don't go. And this is why I tend to believe that we have a very lawless society. We have a lawless society. People, everybody wants to believe that they know the law and they know their rights conveniently. But if I asking you a question, why it is that you can't answer the question? Because why? You don't want to answer the question of the officer. You don't want to answer why the officer. So the officer should not speak to you, shouldn't speak to you because why? So
I think, again, there's the whole conspiracy theory, what people think about the deep state and not wanting to reveal the name. And it's like, ironically, the more, if that is your motivation, the more of a resistance you put up, the more law enforcement are like, okay, now we really want to know what your name is.
And this is why I'm saying you tend to...
Because it looks suspicious.
You put in confrontation before good judgment. You don't need to escalate. You don't need to confront. There's no need for confrontation. Right? Answer a simple question.
And there is always the possibility that the police might be very confrontational from the jump, but you can't argue that that's every time it's the police that's literally going to be aggressive towards you
and that
immediately, you know?
It's some of our culture and how we speak.
Well,
right?
I mean, to some extent, you have to kind of give leeway for the police kind of speaking aggressively, but it's not like they're literally saying, you know, hands up and I'm going to search you now, or like as I see you, as I approach you. They might start off speaking aggressively to some extent. That's how we view authority, unfortunately, in the country. But it hasn't necessarily crossed the line where you are now justified to actively resist because you are the resistance. Like, we haven't reached there yet.
Yeah, let's hope we don't cross that threshold.
As I've said to your former colleague, ASP Arun, complain after. You know, take a complaint to the PCA after, complain to superintendent after, whatever you have to do after, file a lawsuit after, but don't fight and force a confrontation with someone who technically is an agent of the state who has a monopoly of violence in the country. Like, don't do it. Don't pick a fight.
I do not try to get myself in confrontation with law enforcement. Why at this stage, I'm no longer there, I will respect the law. Right. And I expect persons to respect each other. Even when I was on active duty and I've been stopped by officers on the street, I have been as polite I can be polite to them. They ask questions, I answer the questions because at the end of the day, they are doing their job.
Yeah.
Right. And when you go to the bank, when you rephrase from using the bank, when you go to another organization or any organization, if they ask you to produce some documents, do you tell them that well, I am here, why are they produce documents? Do you not ask? Do you not bring your documentation?
I mean, I hate to say this, but the way how the public sector goes, you bring the documentation they ask, and then they say, no, well, now you need these other documentation.
And you have,
but that's a different situation.
But you humbly say what?
That's true.
I will come back on another date with the other documents, right? Because why?
A lot of times you don't want to pick a fight.
You don't want because you want to satisfy your requirements.
That's ironic, right?
Yes.
It's like, I don't want to pick a fight with the public servant, but I'll pick a fight with the guy that's technically legally armed, and depending on if I go too far, he could arrest me.
But at the same time, that is the one that you want to pick a fight with an individual that is paid to protect you.
Yeah. And I would argue that you can't tell me that, you know, police officers are just magically significantly worse than public servants with regards to how they interact with the public. It's about the same, or maybe even in some cases better on the police side, maybe not. But, you know, it's not going to be that, oh yeah, but cops are bad. You know, the public servants are okay, but the cops are just horrible. That's not the case. They're both from the same society. They're both products of the same society. They'll be the same.
I am just concerned.
No, we are way over time, but I just want to get this out there because you mentioned about information that shouldn't go to the public.
Yes.
We have a state of emergency. I don't know if, and maybe we could touch on this subject maybe next week, but some intelligence reports made it to the media during a state of emergency.
That when I
just a quick comment just
persons don't understand the ramification of the document being circulated outside of, because really and truly that was for international, it was sent for international information.
Right.
Right? Agency to agency to give them forewarning. You putting that outside, that has implications.
Could there be a possibility that the leak came from the international side? Unlikely?
Possibly not. But the mere fact that that document was circulating on social media,
yeah,
it speaks to our level of confidentiality when it comes to national security. Everybody wants to know about national security, but
you can't know everything.
You can't know everything in national security.
Because, I mean, isn't that part of the problem? We suspect that there may be people within national security, some of the bad apples might be revealing some of the secrets. The last thing you want to do is be a contributing factor to that.
Exactly, and we like a post for post's sake.
Yeah.
Right? So someone decided to send out that document, so they send out the document and they post it out, and it now has been shared around throughout on social media. Criminal elements and persons who have vested interest in it are now aware of certain things that other persons outside of Trinidad and Tobago is aware of.
Yeah.
Are they not going to change their modus or try to figure out some other ways to get around it?
And then it also makes us look bad to our international partners.
Exactly, because the level of confidentiality when it comes to national security issues,
and
we're poking holes in it.
Isn't that why the U.S. is like, no, we need specially vetted units, despite the fact that some people say, well, we already have that in the U.S. Apparently, the implication is, well, we know you have that, but we want more special vetted units.
So it's not the... When I saw that, I shaked my head and I say, oh, Lord, the ramifications of this type of things, it's not something... And ironically, when you're dealing with critical incidents, media control is very important. The narrative of how you send out information to the general public, how you're treating with that,
yes,
that situation. And if you take the SOE in the context of my, how in my skill set in terms of mass casualty management and critical incident management, this is a critical incident.
Yeah.
And the management of the information depends on how you manage that information, depends on the type of measures that you could put in place, because if you don't manage that information, you are shooting yourself in the foot by trying to mitigate.
So I don't disagree with you. Some people might interpret that as what you want propaganda to control the narrative. I'm like, no. Technically, Ashraf is right. But also how you control the narrative, the measures you use to communicate and control the communication, it's also important. Because there are ethical ways, and then there are unethical ways.
They are.
And it seems as though we're not necessarily proficient in all of the ways that we should be. So we are where we are with transparency and communication. Ashraf, thank you for joining me once again.
You're welcome.
It's actually quite strange not calling you ASPLE anymore. Retired or pre-retired Inspector Ashraf Ali. Folks, apologies once again not being able to take phone calls with our audio problems. Hopefully they'll be sorted out by next week. But until then, as Keaton would say, make today and this weekend a good one. Yes, with all the negatives, we should still try to work towards the positive and not just resign ourselves to defeat. It's nice to be nice out there. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. We will see you next week. God willing, stay safe and bye-bye.
WESN.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color dry sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drum heads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.